Hello and welcome to Hellotouf, the YouTube channel for film, tech and reviews, and today I'm going to be reviewing Mr. Jones, the new film by Agnieszka Holland and starring James Norton and Vanessa Kirby. Let's have a quick look at the trailer.
This is my report on the Soviet question.
And what's your answer?
I don't have one. The Kremlin is broke. So how are the Soviets suddenly on a spending spree?
Paul, I need your help.
Arranging an interview with Stalin.
Gareth, I've been trying to reach you.
Go see Walter Duranty at the New York Times.
Paul?
Mr. Jones,
Mr. Duranty,
so why are you really here?
I need your help.
This is Ada Brooks. She's my star. You know how rich this country is, how vast. South is nothing but wheat fields. Grain is Stalin's gold.
I guess the agenda now.
I don't have an agenda unless you call truth an agenda.
Yes, but whose truth?
Mr. Jones is a vitally important film and is a historical epic drama that's based in the early part of the 20th century. It really talks about the effect of how governments can kind of define how our modern living structures are, and also at the same time kind of lets you understand more about the ideals and the political motivations behind communism and socialism, and how those kind of ideologies can also be manipulated by governments to be able to get what they want. What's really interesting about the film is that really it's a kind of a political reflection of what's going on in the world today. Obviously people's countries and political ideals kind of rule certain countries, UK being no exception, and also China has, say, a communist regime as such, and even North Korea, sort of like dividing South Korea as well. But it's mainly the idea of using ideology to kind of like form these great political sort of movements as such, which is kind of a highlight of what this film is trying to bring to the forefront. The main bulk of the story revolves around the discovery of the Holomodor, which was a famine that happened in the Ukraine from 1932 to 1933 and was basically instigated by Stalin's regime as part of his 5-year plan situation. The story itself in Mr. Jones revolves around Gareth Jones, who was a Welsh journalist who operated around the time, and his need to pursue the idea of truth in all its forms. As a journalist, it was very important to him throughout his life. He is a real character and a real person who also died at a very young age, but also within this film you're telling a very particular aspect of how he brought the story of the Holomodor to international attention. And that's the sort of main premise of the story, the fact that ideology can be twisted and manipulated for people's power and corruption, and their need to make sure that political things are working is very much the crux of the backbone of the narrative of the story. So Gareth Jones basically goes to Russia to find out more about what's going on with Stalin's regime, and also wants to basically get an interview with Stalin. And in this instance he kind of ends up coming across a Pulitzer Prize winning writer called Walter Duranty, who effectively works for sort of the Russian newspapers at the time. He also runs into Ada Brooks, who was played by Vanessa Kirby, and basically Mr. Jones gets told that he's not going to be able to have a chat with Stalin as such, or get an interview with him, and so he ends up getting a tip off about why people are kind of being so secretive about what's going on. The main question that he wants to ask Stalin is how Russia is actually economically benefiting, and they're having going on an economic spending spree when Russia itself is actually broke at the time. So that leads him down the path of actually finding out about the Holomodor, and goes to the Ukraine and discovering horrors that he did not expect. There's another character in the film, George Orwell, who kind of bookends the whole story and kind of like gives the film its kind of frame and structure. And Joseph Maui is the actor that plays George Orwell in this film, and it's really interesting how this is kind of a precursor to him writing Animal Farm. So that's why this story is really important, because it talks about socialist and communist regimes and the idea of totalitarianism. It basically goes on about the dictatorship that Stalin had across Russia and the USSR as a whole, and also kind of highlights how, like, you know, you use people to benefit the regime and not the other way around. This film's executed really well. The cinematography is really well brought together by Agnieszka Holland, and she kind of uses a very sort of high shutter speed as well when filming certain things to make it look kind of jittery at certain points, like so when there's train journeys sort of like going across Europe, and when Mr. Jones is travelling across Europe, so it looks like old found sort of film footage, like, you know, like Pathé film news. And so those techniques of, like, you know, the Pathé kind of film newsreels are kind of like used to sort of highlight and bring you into the idea of this story is being told in the 1930s. And it's really sort of like well brought together. You really feel like that in the 1930s with Gareth Jones, and that's the beauty of the filmmaking, you know, the fact that they achieved that really, really well. And also there was another aspect to the film, and there's certain points in it where it kind of feels like a horror film, and the revelation of what's happening in the Ukraine for Mr. Jones is kind of it's just so visceral and real, and that's what comes across like so beautifully, and you could only probably do that in the hands of an artist like Agnieszka Holland, who is a brilliant director in this instance. The whole surprising thing about Mr. Jones, and what's good about it being a historical epic, and why I think it's a vital film for people to see, is that it's all kind of true. The whole truth of the story is there, and truth is the thing that is kind of the defining factor throughout the film that Gareth Jones is pursuing in terms of how he was as a journalist. And there was a very famous quote, if you look on the Gareth Jones website about the journalist who discovered the Holomodor, you'll see that there was a quote from David Lloyd George about the young man who unfortunately died at the tragic age of 29, but also knowing about how his way of being was that he just always was pursuing truth. I think James Norton does a fine job of portraying Gareth Jones and really finds the character for the piece. Truth is really important in this film to Agnieszka Holland, and it's very important to the character Ada Brooks, played by Vanessa Kirby. I don't know how much of the film was slightly fictionalised for the purposes of the narrative storytelling, but essentially the film itself is worth seeing because of the lush cinematography, the way you're brought into the 1930s, and also it's a good reminder to, you know, when you have certain regimes sort of like dealing with how they effectively deal with people, it's important to question their motivations and to remember that, you know, the truth is always going to come out in one form or another. So I'm going to give Mr. Jones 5 out of 5 because James Norton's performances, Vanessa Kirby and Peter Saarsgaard playing key characters in the film, are all really superb in their roles. The cinematography is really lush, a historical epic that talks about truth, what's not to like. So basically go and see it as soon as you can. Thanks for watching my review on Mr. Jones. If you'd like to see more videos from the Hellotouf YouTube channel, please click here for more videos. Make sure you subscribe here, and please hit that like button, hit the notification bell, and also leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you on the next one.